Do narcissists feel fear? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, and we examine in this video the question of whether narcissists feel fear. In order to do so, of course, we need to establish what is fear. I understand that fear is an intensely unpleasant emotion which occurs in response to perceiving or recognizing a danger or some kind of threat. Fear causes physiological changes that may produce behavioral reactions, such as mounting an aggressive response or fleeing the threat, the fight or flight mechanism that you'll be familiar with. In some instances, the fear is mixed with a response of anger. So it might be, for instance, that initially, having found that there's a burglar in your house, you're fearful, but that fear then transmutes into anger as a consequence of you thinking, who the devil does this person think they are, trying to burgle my house? I'll show them. And you either let them have it with your shotgun or take about their head, smacking them about with a baseball bat. In other instances, the physiological response is to cause you to get the hell out of there. And in so doing, the adrenaline pumping through your body, rather than cause you to fight the threat, causes you to retreat from it, to withdraw from it. And in so doing, for instance, another physiological response is that your vision naturally tunnels. You don't make that happen. You don't think about it happening. You don't cause it to happen. It just naturally happens, so that you're focused on an escape route. So, for instance, if you happen to be chased by a lion, you don't pause distracted by some Louboutin shoes and go, ooh, lovely shoes, and the lion catches you up and eats you. Instead, the tunnel vision means that what's going on in the periphery is ignored and you focus on that escape route. Fear is closely related to the emotion anxiety, which occurs as a result of threats that are perceived to be uncontrollable or unavoidable. It's certainly the case that narcissists experience anxiety, and that's invariably caused by a drop in their fuel that engenders a sense of anxiety to compel them to do something to remove that sense of anxiety, to compel them to seek fuel as if it were to pour oil on troubled waters. But this is not about anxiety. This is about fear. With human beings, there are essentially two types of fear. There's an innate fear, which is the fact that fear is something that naturally occurs in human beings. And this is something that has evolved. Essentially, early humans were quick to fear dangerous situations and therefore would be more likely to survive and reproduce. And being prepared to deal with a threat by being fearful of it gave sway to a genetic effect, which is a result of natural selection. Many thousands of years, of course, we were the centre of the food chain, not at the top of it as we are now. Things would eat us. And those early humans didn't live in well-built structures. They were exposed to the elements. They didn't have the luxury of going to the supermarket and finding the food prepared for them, waiting there fresh or placed in a can, packaged, etc., for their convenience, and largely not going to cause that person a problem should they consume it. Early humans had to distinguish that whether a berry would make them ill or not, whether eating a particular root would give them stomachache or such like. They had to be wary, of course, of certain animals that might be prone to attack and try and eat that human being. There was a fear of exposure to the elements, a fear of the dark and what it might contain. And therefore, the environment in which early humans found themselves created fear as a survival mechanism. For those that stood there with no fear and provided a natural response to that, then in such circumstances they were far less likely to survive and thus became weeded out by natural selection. Fear plays a purpose, and human beings are imbued with that fear in order to preserve them from harm, injury, and indeed death. Fear also is created to drive a human being to achieve, not only to protect themselves, but to achieve things. For instance, the fear of failure, a fear of ridicule. But you have been imbued with this fear as a genetic component. And, with regard to those of you that are an empathic victim, I explain more about the role of fear in that and what you can do about it in the Logic Bulletin, Fear and the Empathic Victim, which you can obtain in the Knowledge Vault. But fear for the human being is something that has been created as that defense mechanism to ensure that when the saber-toothed tiger came towards that early human being, they either banded together with the other human beings and fought it off, or retreated, climbing up a tree, or running far away. Fear can also be learned. There have been studies, psychological studies, that have identified fear conditioning. John B. Watson's Little Albert experiment in 1920 was inspired after observing a child with an irrational fear of dogs. In this study, an 11-month-old boy was conditioned to fear a white rat in the laboratory. The fear became generalized to actually include other white furry objects, such as a rabbit, dog, and even a ball of cotton. Fear can be learned by experiencing or watching a frightening traumatic accident. For example, if a child was to fall into a well and struggle to get out and perhaps was injured, he or she may well develop a fear of wells, possibly of heights, of enclosed spaces, or water. Accordingly, fear is something that is created naturally within a human being and can also be learned. The fear reaction starts in the brain and spreads through the body to make adjustments for the best defense or flight reaction. There has been expansion on this to suggest that in some instances there is the attack or fight response, there is the run, the flight response, but in some instances people are immobilized, they're frozen by fear. In others, a risk assessment takes place to assess what should be done before making an actual decision. In some instances, the individual just screams. In others, they seek to hide rather than necessarily running away. So there are different responses that fear can generate in a human being. The fear response starts in the region of the brain called the amygdala, and that is there to activate, for example, whenever we see a human face with a particular emotion. This reaction becomes more pronounced with fear. A threat stimulus, such as the sight of a predator, triggers a fear response in the amygdala, which activates areas involved in preparation for motor functions involved in fight or flight. It also triggers the release of stress hormones and sympathetic nervous system. This, for most human beings, leads to bodily changes that prepare that person to be more efficient in a danger. The brain becomes hyper-alert, the pupils dilate, the bronchi dilate, and breathing accelerates. Heart rate and blood pressure rise. Blood flow and stream of glucose to the skeletal muscles increases. A part of the brain also, called the hippocampus, is closely connected with the amygdala. That hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex help the brain interpret the perceived threat. They're involved in a high-level processing of context, which helps a person know whether a perceived threat is real. So, for instance, if you were to see a lion in the wild, that would create a strong fear reaction for you because of the risk to you that it might attack you. But if you were to see a lion at the zoo, you're not going to fear it because it can't get to you, and instead you're more likely to respond with curiosity, interest towards it. And in that instance, what has happened is that the hippocampus and the frontal cortex process have contextualized the information and therefore reassures you that actually you're safe, so there doesn't have to be a fear-based response. Understand that this is about a perception of threat. And what is it that a narcissist must always have? Well, of course, The narcissist must always seek the prime aims when dealing with other people, and the presence of another person can pose a perceived threat to control. The way that our brain functions is because of the narcissism operating as that self-defense mechanism, what it does is that our brain functions in a way to basically see whether somebody is a threat to that control or whether they're giving that control. Are they with us or against us? And of course, where that individual is perceived to be a threat to control, remember it's not what you intend, it's how it's perceived by the narcissist, then the narcissism activates a particular response in order to make the narcissist behave in a particular way to nullify that threat to control or gain control over somebody that's come up on the radar, possibly to seek fuel, possibly seek character traits, and possibly seek residual benefits also. Fear can obviously be seen to apply to human beings. But what about the narcissist? Does a narcissist feel fear? Well, it's a common mistake that's made to suggest that the narcissist has no emotions. The narcissist does, but it is a more limited set. The narcissist does experience certain emotions, and the narcissism uses those emotions, effectively hijacking them when it comes to involvement with other people to motivate the narcissist to secure the prime aims. So, for instance, a narcissist goes into a bar with his girlfriend. She says she'll go and get the drinks. She signals she's under control and given fuel. She goes over to the bar. There's no threat to control. There's not an issue. But then the narcissist sees that she's talking to an unknown man at the bar. She's no longer doing something for the narcissist, ordering the beers, and therefore that becomes perceived as a threat to control. In that instance, would the narcissism create fear? Well, potentially, it might generate fear or harness fear of losing the girlfriend. But more likely, it would generate jealousy. And that's linked to a fear of losing. It's not fear in the sense of being afraid, but a jealous reaction occurs instead. And it would motivate the narcissist, for instance, perhaps to revise history and accuse the girlfriend of flirting with the man at the bar when she wasn't, in order to provoke a response in her so that she comes under control. So once she returns to the table with 2 drinks for her and the narcissist, driven by the jealousy, which has been utilized by the narcissism to make him assert control over her, and a revision of history, he says, "Who was that you were flirting with at the bar?" She, of course, was not, but from his perception, she was, because that's what the narcissism is telling him. And therefore, based upon that, he asserts control over her by accusing her of flirting. Her response might be, "Oh, I wasn't flirting with, that's just John from work. Oh, gosh, no, I'm not interested in him in the slightest. It's you that I love. Oh, gosh, no." That signals that she's under control and she's given fuel. The threat posed by her talking to somebody else has now been nullified. Of course, if she said, "What the hell are you talking about? I wasn't flirting with anybody. That's just John who I work with," that's challenge fuel. And the narcissism would then compel the narcissist to either continue to assert control over her directly, or, if that could not be achieved, most likely cause the narcissist in a jealous fit to say, "Fuck this shit, I'm out of here," knocking over his beer and storming out of the bar. He asserts control by withdrawal. So there, a particular emotion, jealousy, is harnessed by the narcissism to compel the narcissist to behave in a particular way. The narcissism also uses fear as a means of motivating the narcissist. For instance, an obvious one would be fear of a person leaving the narcissist, and that would motivate the narcissist to assert control, to nullify that threat to control by the person saying they're going to leave by issuing a preventative hoover. The fear of being beaten up. So perhaps the narcissist has been playing hide the sausage with somebody else's wife, and the husband finds out, and he comes charging across the street to beat the shit out of the narcissist. The narcissist sees this. The aggression being demonstrated by the husband is challenge fuel. It's a threat to control, and the narcissism causes the narcissist to feel frightened so that he runs away, like the walnut, shriveled, bald, mid-range narcissist that he is. He asserts control through withdrawal. The fear of being caught having an affair. means that it drives the narcissist to adopt more discreet behaviours, so that control is maintained over the unwitting intimate partner primary source, and friends, neighbours, family don't become aware that he's nailing the local bike, and therefore the facade is maintained. Fear of being caught drives the behaviours to maintain the assertion of control. Fear of failure in something, at work, in a sporting event, which would result in some form of criticism, possibly even mockery, that also amounts to a threat to control. And with some narcissists, it would motivate them to work harder to avoid that risk. For others, it would motivate them to cheat, to ensure that they succeed rather than fail. And in others, it might motivate them not to try at all, and they withdraw. Either way, that fear of failure is harnessed again by the narcissism to achieve an outcome and a result. In some instances, the narcissist will experience fear, but the narcissism leads to an attack response, or the issuing of bravado, which is part of a form of facade management. As to be seen in fear might result in damage to the facade and a consequential loss of respect, which again amounts to a loss of control. All narcissists experience fear, because fear is one of numerous emotions that the narcissism uses to motivate the narcissist to gain the prime aims of fuel, control, character traits, and residual benefits. Lessers are more likely to respond with an attack response, being more aggressive, being less concerned about maintaining a particular facade of being a decent, kind person. They have a lower threshold on their ignited fury. And therefore, where fear is first experienced, it would then transmute into ignition of fury, because the fear is being harnessed as a threat to control that causes the narcissist to respond with an attack response, a fight response. Mid-rangers, they're more likely to go into either flight or freeze. Flight, assertion of control by withdrawal, the cowardly mid-ranger running away with those shriveled up walnut balls tucked away between their legs. In some instances, they might be immobilized by fear, and in those circumstances, they would resort to a pity play. I can't move, please help me, I'm dying, such like. And in such circumstances, that's done to get somebody else to help them, perhaps somebody with the saviour character to ride in and save them. A greater narcissist is more likely, when experiencing fear, to move to a risk assessment scenario rather than having an immediate knee-jerk reaction, because that will allow a more considered response, which is commensurate with their ability to think ahead and to be calculating. Narcissists do experience fear. They do so because it is necessary for them to experience fear so that it motivates them to perceive, or rather to achieve, the prime aims in some form, either by attacking, by fleeing, by freezing and issuing a pity play, by assessing the risk and then moving to an informed decision, possibly by hiding. But the point is, fear plays a role for the narcissist, and the narcissism harnesses the fear to compel, to motivate the narcissist to behave in a particular way. What about me, the ultra? I don't experience fear, because I'm an amalgam, a hybrid, of narcissist and psychopath. My psychopathy means that I don't experience that fear. However, as I explained, narcissists do. So the next time that you make the mistake of continuing to be involved with the narcissist, but you come at them with a golf club about to wrap it around their head, you will induce fear, many of the times, as one of their responses. But of course, it's not something that you should allow your emotional thinking to get hold of and cause you to feel glee at causing that fear in the narcissist, because it will cause you to continue, perhaps to try and instill fear in the narcissist to get your own back on them. And of course, you'll be then breaching no contact. But that's another matter. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.